Okay, I've already started the general introduction presentation. It will be very brief, and it will start on page 2 with a short opening remark section. Fernando, I understand you will be able to say a couple of words on behalf of the Secretary General team.
Yeah, sure.
Perfect.
Thanks so much, Niklas. We are really very happy to welcome you all to this 2026 Young AIPPI Member Summit. This summit, of course, brings together AIPPI young members community in this kind of virtual environment that you're very used to, but also offers the opportunity to connect with peers from all over the world to make an exchange of ideas, experiences, and discuss topics relevant to you guys. And we are in this satellite session. As you know, the program is divided for the convenience of all young members in a general session and 3 different satellite sessions. This one is for the Americas, which is really convenient for us this time and day. And we appreciate that effort to have, because it's not easy, I'm supposed to have these 3 different satellite sessions throughout the world. And in this occasion, you are going to talk about very interesting topics about trade, compliance, and enforcement. So I'm quite sure that you're going to enjoy it very much. And I would like just a few thanks to Niklas, to Blancas, as chairs of the committee, but of course to all you, all young members of the committee, and all people attending this event that year after year. There is a really hard work to organize this very interesting annual event. So, and some others throughout the year, I must say, it's not only the only one. You have a lot of events throughout the year and even at the Congress. So finally, I sincerely do invite you to share your ideas from your own practice, to engage and enrich the discussion that is going to have today. And finally, I would like to see you all in Hamburg, hopefully. Remember, October 7 to 10, Hamburg, our World Congress. We are going to have a great time there. But in the meantime, enjoy the session here. And thank you, Niklas, and all young members committee.
Thank you so much, Fernando. This was really, really heartwarming, and we're so happy about the support from SJT and the Bureau in general. As is evidenced by the great numbers that you are actually joining us today, also in particular now for the Americas session. And I'm
Thank
sure
you.
this is reflected.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So, but before we dive into the details in the session, I know we're all looking forward to a great moderation and great speakers ahead. Maybe just some overall background for the people who are not as familiar with our program for the summit and our overall program as young members of AIPPI. So we're now at the last session, the America Satellite session. We've already had the global session and interesting ideas exchange session on AI and prompting, where we learned a lot yesterday, and the Asia Pacific and European, Middle East, and Africa satellite sessions today. But that, of course, is only part of the overall program that we try to provide as your young member committee. As you can see here, we're quite a few people. And this, I think this amount of people is also needed because we're covering a lot of events, and we're trying to provide also various different opportunities for our young members in general. So of course, we're a networking platform. We provide opportunities to get to know AIPPI through other young members. We provide connections, for example, also with respect to national and regional groups. So if you want to get involved as a young member, either on an international global level or within a more regional basis, then please reach out to us anytime, and we would be happy to connect you with your peers in order to get started. So this is part of our work, but we're of course also there to help you grow professionally. We're there to give you speaking opportunities as part of the general young member program, such as, for example, now with Summit. And That is also reflected in our yearly program. So our two biggest events are the summit, which is being held right now for 2026, and the forum, which will take place in person during the World Congress in Hamburg next. So if you are registered for Hamburg, please make sure to come. If you are not yet registered, please register. As Fernando already pointed out, it will be an amazing program, and we're very much looking forward to welcoming you. Apart from that, there are also national events which are not directly organized by our committee, but of course, we generally know what's going on through our young member network. So if you are interested in working more with young members or providing events on a national level, please reach out to us. One example that I can give that will happen later this year is a hybrid event in Milan, which is being held by the German, French, and Italian group of national group of AIPPI on the 20th of November, 2026. This will be the second trilateral between these young member groups, and it's special in that it is a young member trilateral. So all of the speakers will be young members, the moderators will be young members. The event will be open for all AIPPI members, of course, but it's also a great opportunity to connect and to join. And it is not even limited in speakers to young members of these national groups. So if you're interested in speaking and you can make it in person to Milan in November, please also reach out to us. Then I'm sure we can facilitate something. Apart from that, looking towards the next year, we'd also be happy to meet you for the midterm meeting 2027, and maybe there will also be a young member event there. This will have to be seen. So far, so good. I don't want to take too much time from the speakers. Again, I'm so happy for everyone attending today, and I'm very much looking forward to the presentation. And with that, Priscilla, as our moderator, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Niklas. I'm just going to share my presentation now. Okay. So good morning, everyone. My name is Priscilla Ordonez from Aguirre Novoa in Ecuador. I'm very happy to welcome you today to the America Satellite session of the AIPPI Young Summit 2026. Today's session brings together young IP professionals from across the region to share ideas and discuss current topics in intellectual property. The purpose of this summit is to connect with one another, exchange experiences, and continue learning together. We have three great speakers with us today. Each of them will share a different perspective based on their own experience and expertise. We hope today's presentations lead to interesting discussions and create new opportunities to connect and collaborate. With that, let me introduce you to our speakers today. We have Ricardo Abrantes from Patent Tree, Portugal, Flavia Murad Schaal from Mansur Murad in Brazil, Jose Antonio Fabara from Bustamante Fabara in Ecuador. And just before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping notes so you know how today's session will work. As you know, this webinar is being recorded. Also, if you have any questions, please submit them using the Q&A box. We have a Q&A session at the end of each presentation, so speakers can answer your questions. And now let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. It's Ricardo Abrantes. He's an European patent attorney, Portuguese patent and trademark attorney, European trademark and design attorney, and UPC patent litigator at Patent Tree. He has a technical background in materials engineering from Instituto Superior Técnico, University of Lisbon, Ricardo works closely with companies, research institutions, universities, and innovators across different technological sectors, supporting them in the protection, management, enforcement, and commercialization of their intellectual property rights. Ricardo also holds a certificate in technology management roadmap and development from MIT and completed the basic training course in European patent law at the University of Strasbourg. So today he will be speaking about climate urgency versus patent exclusivity. Is compulsory licensing for clean technology for the next frontier after pharma? So Ricardo, you can start your presentation now.
Hello, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for being here. Let me just share my presentation. So I think it is now. So thank you for the introduction. It is a pleasure for me to join this 2026 Young AIPPI Member Summit and to contribute somehow to the discussion on the intellectual property. So my topic today is the climate urgency versus the patent exclusivity. And if this compulsory licensing for clean technology is the next frontier after pharma. This is a question that sits on the intersection somehow of patent law, climate policy, technology transfer, and some global equity. The basic tension is easy to identify. On one hand, we need strong incentives to develop and scale clean technologies. On the other hand, climate urgency creates pressure for rapid and broad access to those technologies, especially where they are critical for mitigation, adaptation, or resilience. So the purpose of the presentation is not to argue that patents are the problem or that compulsory licensing is the solution. Rather, I want to explore when, if sometime in the future, compulsory licensing could become a credible policy tool in this clean technology space. So the purpose, so let me start with this central point. The issue is not whether patents somehow matter. They clearly do. Patents can be extremely important in clean technology, and many of these technologies require significant upfront investment, long development cycles, and at some points some regulatory or certification steps. The scale up is not very it's not very easy as well. And in some cases, there is a need for a major infrastructure deployment. So patent exclusivity can support investment, licensing markets, and the commercialization of new technologies. But the question is whether exclusivity can always be reconciled with the need for rapid and global deployment. Clean technology sits between two public interests. The first is rewarding risky technological investment, and the second is accelerating the access to climate-critical solutions. Compulsory licensing is often described as a sort of pressure valve in the patent system. It does not abolish patent rights, but it allows use without the consent of the right holder under certain conditions. And the real question is whether that pressure valve is appropriate for clean technologies, and if so, how precisely it should be designed. Why is this debate becoming unavoidable? Because the climate transition is no longer only about invention. It is increasingly about diffusion. In many areas, we already know at least part of the technology direction. We know about renewable energy, we know about batteries, electrolyzers, smart grids, carbon capture, climate resilient infrastructures, water technologies, and so on. The challenge is getting these technologies deployed fast enough, cheaply enough, and widely enough. But deployment bottlenecks are complex. There is the need for manufacturing capacity, capital cost, standards infrastructure, certifications, some trade barriers can matter as much as the patent rights, and sometimes even more. There is also an access dimension. Clean tech diffusion is not uniform across countries or regions. Some economies are able to adopt and scale technologies much faster than others, which raise questions of equity, dependency, and industrial competitiveness. Finally, many clean technologies are becoming strategic assets. Batteries, grids, hydrogen technologies, carbon capture, and adaptation tools are no longer just environmental technologies. They are also industrial and geopolitical technologies. That is why the compulsory licensing debate, which became highly visible in pharma, may increasingly move into the green technology space. From a legal perspective, the starting point is TRIPS. The Article 31 of the TRIPS agreement does not prohibit compulsory licensing or other forms of non-voluntary use. Instead, it disciplines them. In other words, TRIPS creates flexibility, but flexibility with some conditions. Generally, the authorization must be considered on the individual merits. The scope and duration of the use must be limited to the purpose of which it was authorized. There is normally a requirement to try to obtain authorization from the right holder or reasonable commercial terms before resorting to compulsory licensing. But this requirement may be waived in cases of national urgency, extreme urgency, or even public non-commercial use. The right holder must receive the adequate remuneration as well, taking into account the economic value of the authorization. There is also the domestic supply issue. Article 31F requires use to be predominantly for the supply of the domestic market, which creates difficulty where the policy objective is cross-border access. Article 31B addresses this in the pharmaceutical context, but it is not a general green technology mechanism. And finally, decisions must be subject to judicial or independent review, which is important for due process and legitimacy. But the key point is this: TRIPS does create the room for this compulsory licensing, but clean technology raises harder questions than pharma in terms of scope, implementation, know-how, supply chains, and cross-border deployment. Pharma is the natural reference point, as I mentioned, because public health created a strong moral, legal, and political precedent for compulsory licensing. But the analogy between pharma and clean technology is powerful and, at some point, so far, incomplete. In pharma, the compulsory licensing logic is often easier to frame. There is usually an identifiable product, such as a medicine or a vaccine. There is a direct access problem. The emergency framing is clear, and the solution may involve substitution by generic manufacturer. And the beneficiary is relatively easy to identify: patients, healthcare systems, or public health programs. Clean technology can be much more complicated. We are often dealing with systems rather than single products: a solar panel, a battery, an electrolyzer, a carbon capture system may involve multiple patents, standards, software, trade secrets, and manufacturing know-how. The bottleneck may not be the patent itself. It may be the infrastructure, the amount of money that we have, the certification, the supply chains, or even the access to raw materials. And the beneficiary is less obvious. It might be a state, a public infrastructure operator, a private company, a market, or a specific society in a more broadly way. So pharma gives compulsory licensing legitimacy as a public interest tool, but it does not give us a ready-made template for green technology. There is, however, a serious case for compulsory licensing in green technology. First, the urgency theme. Climate harms are cumulative. Delay has a public cost, and if a technology is truly climate critical, and if exclusivity is materially preventing deployment, there is a public interest argument for intervention. Second, the public funding. Many clean technologies benefit from public research, subsidies, grants, tax incentives, or public procurement. Where public money has played a major role, governments may argue that access conditions should also serve the public interest. The third one is the access equity. If key technologies are concentrated in a small number of jurisdictions or controlled by a small number of market players, developing economies may face affordability or dependency problems. Compulsory licensing may be seen as one possible response. And the last one, definitely, is the negotiation leverage. In practice, the most important function of a compulsory license may not be the license itself. It may be the credible possibility of compulsory licensing, which can encourage voluntary license, patent pools, access commitments, or friend-like arrangements. So my view is that the best use of compulsory licensing in green tech is not as a default policy, but as a credible backstop. There is also a strong case against a broad compulsory licensing model for green technology. The first reason is technological complexity. Clean technologies often involve patent thickets, standards, data, software, trade secrets, and tacit know-how. A compulsory license to one patent may be legally meaningful, but practically insufficient. And second is the investment. Many clean technologies require capital-intensive scale-up, and investors need confidence that intellectual property can be protected, licensed, and somehow monetized. If compulsory licensing becomes too broad or unpredictable, it may weaken the incentives needed to develop and commercialize the next generation of technologies. The third one is an implementation gap. A patent license does not automatically give the licensee the ability to manufacture safely, meet quality standards, access supply chains, or obtain certifications or deploy at scale. And by the end, there is also the trade dimension. Compulsory licensing in green technology could easily become entangled with industrial policy, trade disputes, and geopolitical competition. That may reduce trust and make technology cooperation much more difficult. So the risk is that compulsory licensing is used as a shortcut for problems that are better addressed through finance standards, procurement, public or private partnerships, or voluntary licensing platforms. So when could compulsory licensing for green technology be justified? I think a narrow evidence-based framework is much more persuasive than a general climate exception. The first question is critically, is the technology genuinely essential to climate mitigation, adaptation, or resilience? Not every green technology should qualify simply because it has an environmental benefit. And the second question is bottleneck. Is the patent right actually a material barrier to deployment? Or are the real obstacles the finance, the infrastructure standards, the regulatory approval, or manufacturing capacity? And the third question is market failure. Have a voluntary licensing, patent pools, procurement, or other mechanisms failed before? We don't know. And the fourth question is capacity. Can the proposed licensee actually deploy this technology in a safe way, at scale, and in time? If not, compulsory licensing may be symbolic rather than effective. And by the way, at the end, the proportionality as well. Is the license limited in scope, duration, and territory? Is it somehow adequate in terms of remuneration? This type of tests preserves the legitimacy of the patent system while giving governments a defensible tool for genuine climate critical bottlenecks. And before reaching compulsory licensing, there should be a ladder of interventions. Most green tech diffusion problems will probably be solved upstream. The first step is transparency. Patent landscape, standard mapping, and freedom to operate clarity can help identify where the real barriers are. And the second step is voluntary access. Some licensing pools, patent pools that may be more effective and less confrontational than the compulsory licensing. And the third step is public leverage. Some governments can use R&D funding clauses or procurement conditions or open standards to influence access from the beginning rather than intervening only after conflict emerge. Only after those steps should target the compulsory license become relevant. And even then, it should be a last resort tool for proven bottlenecks and urgent public interest situations. In other words, policy design should make voluntary access easier and compulsory access credible. So, is compulsory licensing for green technology the next frontier after pharma? I'd say that yes, but not in the form of a general climate waiver. It is more likely to become relevant as a targeted backstop. And I would close with three propositions. First, pharma offers legitimacy may be the first step, but they are not a ready-made template. The second is that climate urgency can justify intervention, but only where patents are a real deployment bottleneck. And the third one, the most credible model, is narrow, evidence-based, and combined with other tools. This is, for example, voluntary licensing, public funding conditions, procurement policy, standards, you name it. Ultimately, compulsory licensing should not be seen as anti-innovation, but it should also not be romanticized as an easy answer to climate technology access. The real challenge is designing a system that preserves the incentives for the inventions while making sure that climate-critical technologies can be deployed where they are most needed. And perhaps the key discussion question is this: what should trigger the compulsory access to climate-critical technologies? I also leave here a few reference points that may be useful for the legal and policy discussions. And thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to the discussion and to hear your views on this green technology compulsory licensing. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ricardo, for that valuable presentation. We are going to open up the floor for some questions from the audience. And we have one question, Ricardo. It is, during COVID, we saw governments seriously discuss compulsory licensing from vaccines. If tomorrow a government came to you and said, we want to do the same for solar panels or batteries, would you tell them it works the same way?
I would say that the first sight, they can somehow romanticize the question. And sometimes the question seems to be okay, I would say. But if we go a little bit narrow in the discussion, we see that the ecosystem for green technologies is quite not the same as on pharma. So definitely what would happen is that I would say that imagine, for example, in terms of a vaccine, as you mentioned, if it is the case of a vaccine, we know the product and we know that there are an ecosystem, there are generic companies that could be used, and they have the factories and the needs to or the machinery to do the product. But on green technologies, if we think about a gigafactory, I don't see it the same way. I would say that it depends on the patent, yes, but it depends also somehow on the know-how and on the capacity that someone has, exactly the same capacity to give the product in quality means to the market. So I tend to say that to the government that it might work, but there is some few steps to take before going directly into this compulsory discussion. I would say that firstly, they should tend to somehow try other options before going into this one.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ricardo. And we have one more question, and it's, will compulsory licensing not restrict the commercial exploitation aspects of the patentee's innovation?
It can be, and that's the question. That's the point where exactly the idea is not somehow to limit the scope of the innovation. I would say certainly people will continue to evolve and continue to innovate, but definitely by the end of the day, if there is the case, we don't have it so far. Golden bullet to solve the question of the green technologies. We have some technologies, but it might be that in the end, if there is one specific technology that could be somehow open source, let's say this way, and leave the planet in a very much more comfortable point, then I would say that it might come this discussion. But as I mentioned, there are a few steps to take before going into the compulsory system, and definitely the one that should be designed should not be a one that somehow contributes to a reduction on the innovation development. That would be a quite big mistake, I would say. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for your answer. And the last question we have here at the Q&A is, with compulsory licensing for pharma, there is usually a duration that will apply. At some point, the term ends. What is your opinion with regards green tech compulsory licensing? Could you set a duration?
I'd say that for that, it is so far, we are still far from that discussion, where I would say that I would tend to make it at some point with a term as well, because I don't see it, I see that green technologies are important, but definitely somehow they should not be seen as every time conclusion. So I would say that yes, they should have the same term. Otherwise, the patent would not have the same value. Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. I think those were all the questions for the moment. Thank you so much, Ricardo. We are going to go ahead and pass to our next speaker, and this is Flavia. Okay, so Flavia Murad is a Brazilian attorney, an intellectual property scholar, founding and managing partner of Mansur Murad Advogados, ranked among Brazil's top 10 IP firms. She holds an European PhD in intellectual property law from the University of Lorient and an LLM in international business law from Paris V, and is an alumni of the Franklin Pierce Law Center, a visiting professor at Fordham University and the University of Lorient. She will be speaking to us about digital agriculture and IP in Brazil, from commodity exporter to AgTech, IP exporter. So Flavia, we are happy to welcome you in this space. You can now start with your presentation.
Thank you very much. Everybody is listening, I hope.
Yes, yes, we can see your presentation and listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Priscilla. Thank you very much to my colleagues, Jose, Ricardo, you did great, and Fernando and Nicholas to make this happen. And good morning, everyone. And before I show you a single number, because my presentation will be very commercial and less technical. So let me ask you something. So I'm talking about agriculture and I'm talking about food tech and what is the size of Brazil regarding this sector. So this morning, for example, at breakfast, the coffee you drank, the orange juice, maybe the chicken in last night's dinner, there is a very good chance it came from Brazil. So I'm talking about my country and the size of this sector for the IP environment. There is that is Brazil, you already know. So we've always been a commodity country for this agricultural area. But I'm here to tell you about something that you might not know. So Brazil, where autonomous robots, petrol, soybean fields are 3 in the morning, hunting weeds plant by plant. So very technological came from my country. Brazil, where a farm's data can be worth as much as its harvest. So the message here today fits in one sentence, and it is on the screen actually. Brazil is not only exporting crops, it is building exportable agri-food technology. So in the next 20 minutes, I want to convince you that this sentence matters to every IP lawyer in the room, whatever you practice. So here are some numbers. Because of this story, scale is everything. So I begin with last year. In 2025, Brazilian agribusiness exported $169.2 billion in this sector, a record that is almost 50%, nearly half of everything Brazil sold abroad. And the sector's trade surplus alone, $150 billion. So let's pause for 1 second. Very few economic sectors anywhere in the world generate a surplus of that size. This is the importance of my presentation economically. Brazil is the world leader or among the leaders in soybeans, poultry, beef, cotton, corn, and orange juice. Now, some of you may be thinking, interesting, but I am an IP lawyer. Why should I care about export statistics in agribusiness? Here's why. Scale creates demand. So, not only operational problems that we've seen in the past, millions of hectares, tropical conditions, labor shortages, sustainability pressure. So real problems drive technology adoption. And we have had a few problems in the past, as you know. And technology adoption at this scale produces the thing we care about most in this room. This is really exportable intellectual property that changes, that shifts completely what we were in the past, like receiving a lot of technology. Now we are able to export. So, in other words, these numbers are basically not just macroeconomics, they are the engine of the IP story. So, a solution born to feed one of the largest agricultural operation on earth is almost by definition a solution. So the rest of the world will want. So let's shift here. So how does a commodity giant such as Brazil become a technology producer? Not by abandoning commodities, of course, because we live for them. There is the key inside of this slide, actually. The shift is about converting agricultural scale into protected technology. That's where IP is. Follow the chain on the screen, one by one. Commodity scale creates productivity pressure. Productivity pressure drives digital solutions. Digital solutions become IP assets, and IP assets open the door to international expansion and to an entirely new front of legal work. That's where we are. Patent landscaping, software and data, trade secrets, contract, freedom to operate. So, a little bit of history here. In 1973, Brazil created Embrapa. It's Agricultural Research Corporation. It's a national company and redirected science toward tropical conditions. Very interesting what happened 50 years ago. Recent academic research suggests that this more than double Brazilian agricultural productivity. The old engine, the commodity, remember, was a tropical economy. Now, the new engine is digital, analytical, and algorithm, but in the same logic, science applied to scale. Commodity, scale. So productivity, IP protection. That's the secret. And here's the practical takeaway I want you to keep. The IP strategy follows the technology layer, never the other way around. So, AgTech is becoming an ecosystem. Is this real, or is this just a nice narrative for the biggest Brazilian economy? Let's look at the map. The map I show you here. The radar AgTech Brazil, run by Embrapa and its partner, is the census of this ecosystem. Some years ago, before COVID, in 2019, it mapped 1,125 AgTech companies. 2 years ago, in 2024, we have almost 2,000. 75% growth in 5 years, even during COVID. So notice how the ecosystem organizes itself across the entire agri-food chain. Before the farm, seeds, bio inputs, rural credit. Inside the farm, the column in the middle, the green one, drones, sensors, irrigation. So, and after the farm, traceability, logistics, and food tech. Why do I show this to a room full of lawyers? I show economic numbers and economic growth because of what it means for your client base. That's your client toolkit. In Brazilian AgTech, your client might be a software as a service company, a drone developer, for example, a seed innovator, a data platform, and a food tech. 5 clients, for example, 5 completely different IP problems, 5 layers, 5 ways of doing business, and that diversity is not a complication. It is, in my point of view, an opportunity for countries such as ours with lots of political, economic problems to raise and to be the star of the region and generating income, taxes, and growth for the country. That's why it's very interesting for this association to bring this. So innovation is moving across the chain because here's the thing: each link of that chain asks a different legal question. Before the farm, seeds, genomic inputs. Like I said, you are in the world of plant variety protection, another IP issue. Biotech patents, another IP issue, and licensing contracts in terms of deep transaction and very complicated with a lot of stakeholders involved. Inside the farm, machinery, drones, sensor, irrigation, hardware, basically. Classic patent territory, plus software, plus critically freedom to operate. After the farm, traceability, platforms, marketplace, food tech. The value lives mostly in software and trade secrets. So, moving forward, let's test the thesis against the hardest data we have, patents. So, the classics. Last year, 2025, WIPO published a dedicated patent landscape for Brazil. You might know that, and called the country a key player on the global stage. So, as you can see in this slide, the numbers are huge. Almost 90,000 published agri-food related patents in Brazil. Of those, in blue, 20,000 were filed by Brazilian innovators, about 22% of the filings in the country. Isn't it amazing? I think it's very strong. So, where is Brazil strong in this sector? Fourth in the world in planting, harvesting, and storage technology. Sixth in automation. Seventh in soil and fertilizer management. And where are the gaps? So nothing is pink and red and rose. So lower specialization in mapping and imagery and in robotics and drones. So from one side, we have very strong economy in fertilizing, storage, soil, planting, and everything. On the other side, we have a very low technology. So in imagery, robotics, and drones. But if we think that the weakness could be transformed into a strength, if we transform it differently, it is a map of opportunity. That's what I say. It shows precisely where the next generation of Brazilian-owned digital IP can be built. For young IP lawyers, patent data like this is a compass. It tells you where clients are being strong, where competitors are moving, where FTO matters first, and where the portfolio value can be created. But do Brazilian companies actually export technology, or it's just an aspiration? So some numbers and some examples of active companies. So Solinf Tech, born in Brazil, it's a sugarcane field company, now runs AI-driven autonomous robots on American farms. In a single year, it expanded to the US acreage by almost 25%, with more than 100 Solex robots working in fields in the United States. Can you imagine that? A Brazilian company doing so in the harvest in the United States? So it's amazing for us to say that. Think about the reversal that in image. Brazilian robot weeding farms in Indiana. That's what I want to say. Another example is the company Stara, a precision machinery that sells on 5 continents in more than 35 export markets. So what it matters? Agro tools, agricultural data, and environmental intelligence. So it was described by Reuters as building the world's biggest environmental services payment platform. So look at the economy here booming, a potential of $15 billion investment platform. And Embrapa's GM soybean technology, co-developed with BASF. You see, many international stakeholders working together in several jurisdictions, like I can mention 7 jurisdictions. But here, what makes this market genuinely interesting. The flow runs both ways. Brazil is still a major destination for foreign technology. So the other way around. Remember, domestic applicants account only for 22% of the applications. The majority comes from the United States, followed by Germany, Switzerland, Japan, and France. So look at the top filers: BASF, and then Bayer, Nestle, Deere, CNH. So the honest picture here is a two-way flow. Foreign technology comes in, Brazilian technology goes out. And for us, as lawyers, a two-way flow means work in both direction, means precision, means a very sophisticated counseling for our clients. So that's another thing. Is this window growing or closing? To finish my presentation. So what I want to bring here is that the European Patent Office answered that in 2025. Patent filings in digital agriculture are growing almost 10%, 3 times faster than the average across all technology field. So what did EPO say? EPO president described the field as advancing at an unprecedented pace. In Latin America, we have space, we have a huge territory, is growing at 11% a year. That is above the global pace, which is very good for the region itself. The drivers are exactly what you would guess, imagining sensing, automation, drones, and AI. For our practice, what matters? Just to finish, this means one thing. In a field growing this fast, portfolio thinking beats asset by asset thinking. The valuable advice is no longer let's file the patent. It is let's design a coherent portfolio that grows with the company. So that's what I wanted to share with you. I hope this was useful for the practice and also for the opportunities.
Thank you so much, Flavia. Those
Thank
were
you.
very impressive numbers and data about Brazilian AgTech and the opportunity there is to develop technology and IP. So now we open up a space to answer any questions people may have. Let's see. And it looks like there is one question. So I'm gonna read it to you. So Flavia, throughout your presentation, you showed how Brazil is becoming an exporter of agri-tech innovation. Looking ahead, what do you think will be the biggest opportunity for, let's say, young IP attorneys from other countries, like in Latin America, in this field over the next 5 years?
I think, Priscilla, that lots of opportunities are coming, are already here, actually. We can see plant variety protection, biotech patents and licensing contracts, and also new patents being filed. So the opportunity is huge. The economy asks for that. We urge for IP protection in the region, and those are the main reasons why the agricultural sector is very important for Latin America. So let's embrace the numbers and let's embrace this greatness. And us as IP attorneys, especially younger ones, because you're seeing the technology that we have never seen before. So look at AI, look at the drones, how fast it grew to the region and how fast it is good as a consequence for many problems that we've been facing in all regions, not only in Brazil, but like in Colombia, Argentina, Peru, and all the countries, we have so many problems socially. So if we face the food problem and the productivity, the tax problem, and also if we face all that with IP protection and exporting, I think we would create a very better economy and opportunities for young lawyers. That's what I hope, and that's what Latin America can bring to the world. That's what I think.
I agree. I think there are many opportunities there. And we have one more question at the Q&A, and it says, does Brazil have any intergovernmental international plans for IP protection?
Well, we have a very good legislation. I mean, patents work here very well, and we have many incentives. We have innovation legislation, and we have a lot of, let's say, a lot of incentives for that, and tax, especially tax incentives for companies and and the producers, the local producers too.
Great. Well, thank you, Flavia. I think those were all the questions, and we are going to go ahead and present our next speaker. So my colleague Jose Antonio Fabara from Bustamante Fabara today is going to walk us through a very interesting and current topic about IP. It's about IP ownership in esports versus traditional sports, a comparative analysis of event organizers' rights. Jose Antonio has more than 10 years of experience in law, focusing his professional practice in the areas of sports, entertainment, corporate, and intellectual property law. He currently leads the sports and entertainment law practice at Bustamante Fabara. His specialization in sports matters, both in law and management, has allowed him to provide comprehensive advice to athletes, clubs, federations, event organizers, agencies, sponsors, and other actors involved in sports in the development of their projects. Likewise, he has vast experience in corporate and intellectual property matters, advising clients from different industries. So Jose Antonio, welcome to this summit. You can start now with your presentation.
Thank you, Priscilla, for the nice introduction. And thank you everyone that made this possible. For me, it's the second year as part of this Young AIPPI forum, and it's a pleasure to always be part of this and to share interesting topics, at least interesting for me. So at the end of my presentation, you will tell me if you share the interest of this topic with me. So as Priscilla was telling you, I'm gonna present the different or the comparison of the IP protection between traditional sports and esports. And what I wanted to start doing with you is sharing why this topic is important for me and why does this matter. So I'm a lawyer who specializes in IP law and sports law. So I'm constantly trying to look up to these topics or these matters where these two areas of law meet. And even though I've been a lifelong enthusiast of traditional sports, esports have not been that attractive to me. But since in the last couple of years, this area has been growing constantly, I got curious on how is it working. And one of the things or the questions that arose to me in this by this curiosity was how are they organized? And then I saw that their major protection is IP, as I'm gonna show you. So first of all, an overview between esports and traditional sports. Esports, it's a competitive, organized video gaming at a professional level with structured tournaments and leagues, professional contracts, substantial prize pools, and a digital-first ecosystem. This was absolutely new to me. I had no idea how big these events are. I'm gonna show you a couple of pictures afterwards, but I didn't knew that these sports were that organized. On the other hand, traditional sports are organized athletic competitions with a physical effort and a skill that's played according to established rules, and for it to be considered professional, it has to have a financial compensation. And it's a physical first ecosystem, as we are going to see afterwards. So a couple of numbers. Esports has a market of 6.8 billion projected by 2030. That's a big number. Audience of 580.5 million of people in 2024, and that grew to 640 million people in 2025. The international, that's a tournament of Dota 2, a game. It has the highest prize pool until now of 40 million. That's a lot. And the League of Legends Worlds 2024, it had a prize of 2.25 million. Traditional sports, on the other hand, it has a global industry of 500 billion. The NFL annual revenue, it has 23 billion. The World Cup, the 2026, the projected, it's of 4.26 billion people watching the World Cup, and the rise of money derivated of the FIFA World Cup. And the Olympic broadcast, it has 7.6 billion between 2021 and 2032. Even though the esports number are not getting yet to the numbers of the traditional sports, I think that we may conclude that it's amazing the market share that the esports are having. Some viewership comparison. For example, the League of Legends Worlds 2023 has viewers of 6.4 million in a peak of concurrent viewers in 2023. Counter-Strike major tournaments have 20 million concurrent viewers. On the other hand, Super Bowl, for example, it has 127 million, and the FIFA World Cup has 1.5 billion only in the final, viewing concurrent the final.
Jose, sorry to stop you, but we can't see your slides. It's
I'm
sort
really
of
sorry.
No, don't worry. I think it's because of your presentation mode. It was just on the first slide.
Yeah, like we can see the slides, just you were not like moving forward.
Let me share it again. There?
Give us a sec.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. So the overview in the sports, the structural allocation of IP rights differ fundamentally between traditional sports and esports. In traditional sports, IP is encapsulated in an organizational structure. This is due, as we are gonna see afterwards. The traditional sports have kind of a pyramidal structure where the International Olympic Committee is at the top, and the clubs or the national clubs are at the bottom of this structure. And the IP generated and the IP rights are all holded or rights of the stakeholders that form part of this organizational structure. But no single entity owns the sport. We cannot say that it's FIFA who owns the sport, but the organizational structure that owns football with all of the stakeholders together. FIFA is just kind of the upper part of that pyramid that kind of controls the organization, but it does not own the sport. On the other hand, we can say that esports, each specific game is owned by the publisher who owns the copyright and the game itself. And therefore, we have a single point of IP ownership that gives you an unparalleled control. In traditional sports, the different regulatory bodies are the ones who issue the legal framework, and even there's national legislation that regulate the specific rules in sports. While in esports, it's basically governed by the general IP law, copyright, trademark, licensing agreements, among other areas. But there's no unified sport-specific regulation. As these esports do not have the organizational structures that we do have in traditional sports, there's no connection between one game and the other, and therefore there's no unified sport-specific regulation. And it's specifically a publisher-driven governance. It's the publisher who decides what happens in these matters. And we've identified three basic regimes that we have to take into consideration: copyright law, trademark law, and image rights. In copyrights, the esport, it protects the software, the game code, the audiovisual elements, the character designs, among others. Every frame, it's a reproduction of a copyrighted material. So in the discussions of if I'm reproducting a copyrighted material, if you are posting a frame of the game, you are reproducing the copyrighted material. And public performances require authorization, and this is due to the license agreement, as we are going to see afterwards. In traditional sports, copyright only focuses principally in broadcast footage, in league-produced content, in regulatory produced content such as mascots, anthems, maybe the designs of the t-shirts that the players wear, among others. But it does not protect the sport itself. For example, rules are not protected by copyright. Maybe the text of the books, it may be protected as a copyrighted material, but not in the way the esport is protected globally by copyright. This is a fundamental difference, as that's the basic difference on how they both differ. In trademark law, in esports, team names, league logos, the name of the games, the tournament branding, all are protected by trademark law, as you may imagine. But the trademarks are always subordinate to the publisher owned master trademark. All have to be part of this publisher owned master trademark. In traditional sports, the team names, logos, tournament brandings, among others, are also protected by trademark law. But it's important to defer that these trademarks are usually owned by the regulatory bodies who organize the tournament, or by the club that has the name, or the league that organizes the event. And there are authorizations between the different bodies that form part of this organizational structure for the use of the different trademarks. In the image rights, first of all, in esports, there are no image rights attached to the characters that form part of the game, as image or name, image, and likeness are specifically related to a natural person. And these characters are protected only by copyright, but not by a image right. The image rights in esports would be specifically for the natural person that plays in a professional level the game and that participates in an event. But what happens when a character assimilates a real person? For example, in games like Madden or FIFA, where the character replicates a real person, an existing person, it has to have the specific authorization of that person so that the game can replicate the natural person in the game. And that's part of the name, image, and likeness rights that a natural person has. And in esports, what we've identified is that natural person that participate in these events have limited negotiation power, and that there's always a perpetual and worldwide license that guides the sharing of this image. In traditional sports, athletes retain and monetize the name, image, and likeness. They have a strong negotiation power. I'm sure that many of you may have, or some kinds of you may have received cease and desist letters from players for the use of their image, or maybe you've been sending cease and desist letters to different companies that abuse of the name, image, and likeness of different athletes and players, specifically on the time where great events such as the World Cup happen. And NIL are rights that are protected through a combination of publicity rights, intellectual property, and different contract law and licenses that work, regimes that work all together. In the contractual regime in esports is basically governed by the EULAs, that's a license agreement, the end user license agreement, and this is kind of the constitutional framework of esports. This is the primary legal instrument governing the esport, and there's a license agreement per each game. So as I was telling you, there's no unified, but there are different frameworks that govern the different games. These emerged in 1970s and the 1980s with the software industry and expanded afterwards. There are certain landmark cases that basically what they rule is the license enforceability of shrink wrap license enforceability that as we're gonna see in the next slide, it's a type of accepting the license agreement. And the basic key principle in here is that the publisher licenses the game. It does not sell the game, and the user acquires no ownership or interest when it buys the game. The different methods of acceptance of these terms and enforceability, it's in a click wrap where you click this common box and accept it. The browser wrap that by continue using the game, you accept the terms. And the shrink wrap that it was really common before when you were buying the games in the physical games to play in the Nintendo 64 or PlayStation before with the CDs or the cassettes, where the license agreement was part of the wrapping of the game. The organizational structure in traditional sport, as I was telling you, it's in a pyramidal structure where the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, is at the top. The international federations go afterwards. Like for example, FIFA. I'm gonna use the specific example of football. Then the Continental Confederations, CONMEBOL, that it's the South American Confederation. National federations and leagues. In Ecuador, it's the Ecuadorian Football Federation, and the Liga Pro, that it's the league that organizes the professional football. And afterwards, the clubs such as Liga or Barcelona, that are Ecuadorian teams, and afterwards the players. The different IP rights are distributed among this, and usually you have kind of a waterfall authorization, because the players authorize the clubs to use their image, the clubs authorize the leagues or the national federations to use the image of their players and their trademarks, and they authorize directly FIFA or CONMEBOL, depending on who organizes the team, the tournament, and so there's a waterfall of authorizations, and all of these authorizations are regulated by the bylaws of the different organizations, or the contracts that they issue and subscribe to be part of the different tournaments, and the rules issued by the different organizational structures. On the other hand, the ownership structure in esports is all centralized in the publisher, who's the IP owner. The publisher owns the game code, owns the characters, owns the music and the graphics, owns the storylines, and owns the logos. Here are a couple of examples of publishers, and basically the quick conclusion here is that the publisher is the owner of it all. There's a key contrast in here. It's a structural asymmetry. In traditional sports, no single entity owns the sport, while in esports, the publisher does. The rules are maintained by independent bodies. For example, in football, the IFAB, the publisher makes the rules in the esports. The access, the sports, it's in public domain. Anyone can play. We can do in Hamburg a tennis game or a football match between us, and nothing happens. While in esports, it's governed by the license agreement, and it has to have the specific authorization of the publisher. In governance, independent regulatory bodies are the ones who govern the sport, while in the esports, the publisher is the one who organizes it. And exactly the same replicates with the event organization. In Olympics or in the FIFA World Cup, to be the organizer of the event, you have to go through a bidding process, and you propose where it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, what are you going to invest. There's a multi-year preparation, and there are host nations that organize everything for it to happen, and they subscribe a contract with the owner of the event, for example, the IOC or FIFA, sign with the host nation, and they have specific obligations. Some of them are, for example, IP obligations. In FIFA, in the World Cup, you may have heard that many of the stadiums had to cover the name as it was a commercial brand of the stadium, and that there were kind of some conflicts arose there. In esports, there is no event without prior authorization of the IP right holder. In here, we do find something in common between the two, as the bidding process, it also goes or ends up in an authorization from the regulatory body that holds the right of such event. And some difference, final difference between these type of events. In traditional sports, there's a fan passive consumer structure, and it's basically limited to user generated content, and the revenue is through tickets, broadcast, and merchandising. And basically, most of the issues arise regarding the unauthorized redistribution of broadcast or the unauthorized use of the brands of the different stakeholders involved. In esports, there's an active participation culture. You may see that there are streamers that are constantly sharing how they play and how they their strategies and how they advance in the game. There's also a great problem in modding. I was investigating the esports structure. I saw that there is a great problem due to many players modify the game without the authorization of the publisher, and obviously that would maybe consider an unauthorized use of the game. And the audience is it's more of an interactive structure, so the consumer is also a creator. And to see the impact in here in Twitch, that it's a streaming platform, there are 240 million monthly active users, and many of them, a great percentage of them, what they do is share things regarding the use of esports and their strategies. In player rights in traditional sports, they have standard protections and basically regulated by labor law. In esports, they vary between the game and between the organizer of the specific tournament with authorization of the publisher. But there's no universal standard contract. Whether it's an employment classification, it's unclear. There are some emerging player associations, but maybe they are competing between each other to be the one that gets recognized worldwide. And most of the careers of professional esports players are short due to burnout, and most of them retired in the mid-20s with no pension, and many of them without going through, for example, having a career or a formal career, and after this short career, this short esport career, have to kind of be creative on what to do afterwards. The broadcasting and media rights in traditional sports, and as many of you know, generate large revenues or are a large revenue source, and basically it's the main revenue source. The NFL, it has a 113 billion revenue in between 2023 and 2033. The Premier League, 6.7 billion pounds between 2025 and 2029. The NBA is 17 billion. So it's one of the most important revenue sources. In esports, the standard is completely different, as what the different tournaments and publishers have been doing is they wanted everyone to watch. So it's a free to watch model, where there's usually no pay-per-view. The revenue comes through a sponsorship, advertisement, and in-game item sales. And there's a lot of friction between streamers due to the unauthorized use of IP rights from the publisher. But as you may see, the structure is the revenue structure is completely different. One of the key discussion is fair use. So in esport context, some key factors to take into consideration is the purpose and the character of the use, the nature of the copyrighted work, the amount and substantiality of the use, and the effect of the use on the potential market. These are key factors to analyze and to decide whether the use is may be considered fair use. And we've seen or concluded that the basic uses or unauthorized uses in esports is a transformative use, because they may add commentary to the game, or they are teaching on how to play the game, but they also may critique on a game happening, and also they may modify the game that may not be a fair use. The market effect, does the fan-created content substitute or promote the publisher commercial interest? I believe yes, and that's one of the main reasons on why publishers do not fight back against the streamers. The amount used, the streaming full game playing sessions uses substantially all of the copyrighted work, so that's a great discussion there. And the character of the use, is it a commercial use or not? And those are some questions that I had, but I'm not sure of the answer yet. But one of the convergence that we saw is that traditional sports are adopting a strategy from esports, and they are more digitalizing themselves from time to time. For example, NFL has a direct-to-consumer platform. ESPN or Dance or Amazon Stream, Apple TV are becoming platforms that share constantly different tournaments to watch and to stream live. And it was really interesting that FIFA reached to an agreement with YouTube to, in some territories, share the first 15 minutes without any cost and to any user. This does not happen in Ecuador, but what I've been investigating is that it happened in the US. So, as I was telling you, the ecosystem and the stakeholders in the traditional sports are the federations, the leagues, the teams, the athletes, and we have to add the sponsors, the broadcaster, and the venues. In esports, the publishers, the developers, the organizers or basically the publishers and the developers are the ones that generate the IP, the IP, and the organizers, the team, the players, the platforms, and the sponsors are the ones that have to articulate with the IP right holders to use them and to be part of this structure. The recurring legal tensions in esports is that there are a lot of conflicts due to non-renewal or unilateral termination of tournament licenses, unclear territorial licensing restriction, and the publisher versus third-party tournament organizer disputes. Here are some examples, or a specific example between Blizzard, that's a publisher, and KASPA, that it was a streaming platform to watch a tournament organized by them, but it was of one of the games of Blizzard Entertainment, specifically StarCraft. And the Blizzard argument was that they were the copyright holder of StarCraft, and it was a license agreement violation by the broadcaster, and it was an unauthorized commercial exploitation. On the other hand, KASPA's counter argument was that they cultivated the StarCraft esports ecosystem with minimal support by Blizzard, and that there was an independent performances by players, and that they had invested a lot in significant structure. The outcome was that Blizzard asserted the IP control and that the game publisher retained the ultimate control over the commercial exploitation of their game, specifically in events and in the broadcasting of their games or the tournaments organized of using their game. The lesson of this, first of all, what traditional sports should learn from esports is that I believe that they have to adapt to the digital distribution and streaming models that I think that they are doing. They have to engage more with user-generated content and start to embrace the digital-first approach for audience engagement. I believe that the way of watching traditional sports is changing. And I believe that traditional sports have much to learn from esports. And what should esports learn from traditional sports? I believe that the most important is to try to organize the organizational structure as traditional sports have. This will help develop a mature governance, also clear frameworks for players, for teams, for IP holders, and this will also balance the right of the publisher with the rest of the ecosystem that participate in esports. There's also a convergence between both of them, that both industries benefit from cross-pollination of IP strategies. Traditional sports, it's becoming more digital, and esports is seeking more institutional structure. So both of them are learning from each other. Just to end up, one comparative view that I wanted to share with you is that in traditional sports, there is a physical venue where they play, where in esports you have the digital venue, and also you are having these amazing tournaments that have a physical venue. In the events, you have events like the FIFA World Cup, but esports are day by day growing in their tournaments and are becoming amazing. The structure is governed as I was telling you by different organizational bodies, and in esports it's an independent of each of the publishers. Some of them show the image rights. In traditional sports you have each player owning their name, image, and likeness. In the esports, you have the characters, and they differ, as I told you before, whether they represent a real person or whether there are characters created and protected by copyright. The IP rights basically hold that are held by this organizational structure, and the copyrights shown there basically are from FIFA. But in esports, you have the trademark that of the game that's owned by the publisher, the characters who are owned by the publisher, the trophies who are also owned by the publisher, and that's the kind of the comparison that I found as an outsider of the esport and a fanatic of traditional sport. And one last thing I wanted to share with you is that esport is each day getting into traditional sports, and the player that you see there, it's the French player Griezmann. He played for Atlético de Madrid. And because his son loved to play video games, he started to celebrate his goal as the dance of one of the favorite characters of his son in one of the games he played. thank you for being part of this event and open to any questions.
Thank you very much, Jose Antonio. That was very interesting presentation and a particular relevant topic, given the excitement of the work happening right now. And before we conclude this session, just very quick, since we have our time limit now, we have one question that I would like to ask you is, do you think publishers should have more responsibility for protecting the rights of esports players, given the level of control they have over the ecosystem?
Sorry, I couldn't hear one part of the question. Can you repeat it, Priscilla?
Yes, of course. So do you think publishers should have more responsibility for protecting the rights of esports players, given the level of control that they have over the ecosystem?
Definitely, Priscilla, and I'm gonna divide my answer in two. First of all, if publishers want for esports to keep growing, I think that they have to construct, to build this organizational structure, because if not, the players are gonna lose interest on participating on tournaments and to keep playing. And therefore, the esports ecosystem will stop and their development, and that would be a shame. And also, as I talked during the presentation, as the careers of these esports players are that short, there are many of associations that are going to start to build up and to kind of claim protection for them. And the publishers would have to start to kind of negotiate with these associations to reach up agreements for the protection of the different players.
Perfect. Thank you, Jose Antonio, so much. And before we wrap up, I don't know if we want to take like a picture, group picture. So maybe we can all just smile for a second so we can take a screenshot now, please. I think that's it. Perfect. Thank you all very much. I'm going to just share this really quick here. And I think I just want to thank you so much to the speakers, the organizers, all of you for your contributions and for sharing this space with all of us. And I guess this brings the satellite session to the end, and also the AIPPI Young Summit of 2026. I want again to thank everyone for your time and efforts, your energy, and everything you brought to this table. During this summit, we had the opportunity to not only share knowledge, but also a vision to explore IP and market access in the Americas. It has been a real pleasure to be part of this session and to share this space with all of you. Thank you to our speakers for their valuable insights and to everyone who joined us today. Before we wrap up, I would like to share a couple of important reminders. First, don't forget to join the AIPPI Young Members Forum that will take place during the AIPPI World Congress in Hamburg this October. It's a great opportunity actually for young professionals to connect, exchange ideas, and continue building relationships within our global community. Also, please save the dates for the second AIPPI Young Members Trilateral, which will take place in Milan on November 20th. You can find more information about both events in the official website of AIPPI.org. And thank you all for being here today with us. We hope you've enjoyed the session and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks a lot.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.